Welcome to Literally Books, the podcast where we read literally anything because it shouldn't be a saga to find your next favorite read. My name is Magda.
And I'm Lindsay.
And today we have a super special episode. We are going to be covering our very first procedural mystery thriller book by Laura Griffin, Innocence Road.
I am so excited to talk about this book, Magda. I'm so happy. We talked about cozy reads. This was my coziest read. I've never been happier.
It will give you everything that you want from a procedural book. You are not going to be disappointed by this.
No.
And I'm so excited because not only are we going to be covering this, but Laura is going to be joining us here shortly to talk all about her latest book. So I'm so excited to be able to chat with her. But before we do that, Lindsay, what have you been reading?
I am still deep in my Texas Book Festival preparation. I'll talk about this probably in a little video, but I am rereading, almost finished with Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author. Whew.
We got to see her at the National Book Festival, and she was just, the best of the best. I just fell in love with her and all of her storytelling. And the way that she writes is one of the most fascinating things because she is truly a pantser.
I don't understand, having read this book, knowing now that she did this without planning it. She has a labyrinth of a mind because it's like a very complicated story of interweaving perspectives, and it's a meta story within a story. So like trying to keep that straight in your brain and the way that it fits together so beautifully is like, I don't understand that. It's incredible.
I can't wait to read this. I just fell in love with her, and like all of the ways that she grabs inspiration from all the things that she's gone throughout her life. It is just such a fascinating journey that she has gone through, and I can't wait to read this book because I feel like a lot of her kind of her personality gets thrown into it.
It is science fiction at its absolute best. It's science fiction in the way that like science fiction is supposed to reveal things about you. We've talked about this before, I'm like, when we're not in humanity, like you learn a lot more about humanity, and that's why I like science fiction. Like that is this kind of science fiction. It's not like lasers and spaceships and whatever. It's like, what about science reveals what is most human about us? And like, it's just so freaking good. Anyway, what are you reading?
I am on the same boat as you. I was also very, very deep into my Texas Book Fest readings. So I have finished The First to Die at the End and The Survivor Wants to Die at the End by Silvera. And let me tell you, Lindsay, this whole series, I have not cried this much with a series like ever in my life. Like this has been just nonstop crying, but in the most cathartic way possible. Like I think, like I mentioned in our last episode, the whole premise of the series is what if there's this company that can predict your death within 24 hours, and the name of the company is called Deathcast. And each of the book series is going to follow two different characters where their stories are kind of interweaved a little bit through each of the books. So it's kind of interesting the way that Adam does this because you start following these two characters in, let's say, in book one, but then we also get different perspectives from side characters that later on become really important throughout the story. Book one, we have our two characters. I love that book two, for example, it takes us back to the beginning of the founding of the company and a little bit of the hiccups that the society goes through as the company is launching. And then book three kind of kicks up after a really important event happens in book two, and we follow two separate characters throughout. It is a story about finding connection when you think that you're at the end, and what happens when different type of people from all kinds of paths are potentially thrown into this aspect of life where you're like, you have one day to leave. Like, what are you going to do? And what happens when you start throwing like mental health issues into place and people are trying to commit potentially self-harm to each other? Like, are they waiting for the call at midnight to see if they were successful, or what do they do? So I love that he explores so many themes within humanity itself for many like different paths of life, which is quite lovely. And one of my absolute favorite things is that this is like a really good representation of the LGBTQ community as well. And he's really focused on that aspect. And I loved it. It was just beautiful. I bawled. Oh, it is. And I can't believe I hadn't read these books already because, Lindsay, you're absolutely going to love them. I'm in love with this series.
It's the next book I'm picking up after I finish. They're literally sitting right over here.
Ooh, I see them.
Waiting to be picked up. And because you have done such a good job of being on the Adam Silvera Board of Tourism and convincing everyone to go and visit his world. So I will be
so good.
Ready to hear you talk to him by next week.
A little bit nerve-wracking, but I am so excited because I have so many questions for him and for Tracy Dion too, which we covered her entire series here on the podcast earlier this year, which we also fell in love with her storytelling and the Arthurian magic. It was so, so fun. So I can't wait to, I'm so excited. It's going to be a fun weekend next weekend. By the time this episode comes out, we have already done it. So treat yourself. Yay you, yay us.
We're in full freak out mode right now, weeks. But in a few weeks we'll be happy. Well, it'll be but a memory. Yeah, I'm so excited.
Do you want to take a little bit of a break?
Let's do it. Okay, everyone, it is time to get into our the first part of our primary discussion, which is our quick summary, discussion, recap of Laura Griffin's Innocence Road. We won't be giving away any spoilers, but we will be exploring various themes from the book.
Yes, I loved it so much, but I think let's give a little synopsis so then we can kind of start gushing about the book.
Okay, we got it.
When a young woman's body is found outside of Madrone, Texas, police officer Leanne Everhart is assigned to lead the investigation. What begins as a routine case soon points to something much darker than anyone expected.
As Leanne digs deeper, she uncovers unsettling links between the murder, a controversial past case involving a possible wrongful conviction, and her late father's work as a detective. Each clue forces her to question not only the evidence, but also the people she's always trusted.
Reporters swarm the small town and tempers flare as rumors of corruption and cover-ups spread between her volatile boss, a brother battling his own demons, and a shadowy figure watching her every move. Leanne must balance loyalty and truth in a place where both come at a cost. I feel like I need to start my NCIS intro. Wow!
Or a gavel, joom, joom. I'm a Law and Order galley, but yeah.
Okay. I was thinking of, what's the name of the guy from Miami and CSI? And then you just take his glasses and he just yells, ow! No, you don't know? Okay.
No, I have no idea, but I do love this description.
Will understand what I'm talking about.
Next time I visit my grandfather, who has never changed his channel off of CBS, I'm sure he's seen every episode. I'll ask him to show me.
Side note, when I was in Colombia recently visiting my mom, this was the only thing that we watched and everything was dubbed in Spanish.
Amazing.
And every day at 5:30 p.m., I would go to the couch and we would watch 3 hours of Law and Order, 911, NCIS. It was
Love 911 too.
So good. So good. So my very first time watching that and it was all dubbed in Spanish, which they did a really good job because I was very intrigued by the stories. Okay, so Lindsay, what did you think about the book?
I cannot tell you how happy this book made me. I started talking about this at the beginning of the episode, but I think we've been reading a bunch of stuff. I've also been really sick. You've been really sick. Work has been crazy. And when I tell you this book was like a balm to my soul, I read it in 2 days. It just was exactly what I wanted. What do you think?
Oh, I love that. You know me. I have a very soft spot for a good procedural. And this just gave me a little bit of everything. It gave me my female main character who has a really complicated relationship at work, also with her family, and then multiple storylines that are going to be weaved throughout the story as they kind of get nicely tied at the end. It was perfect. There's a lot of drama. There's a little bit of murders. Listen, you kind of need a little bit of a murder for this type of book. So I really love that. And it talks about a lot of the politics within law enforcement, which I loved. I love kind of reading a little bit about potential power struggles between different organizations, levels of corruption. It gave me everything that I wanted in a good procedural book.
Yeah, it was sort of It reminded me a little bit of like Mayor of Easttown, if you've ever seen that show, where you like have like, did you write that down?
Lindsay?
Tell me the face.
I was Googling that right
Yeah.
now. You can kind of see it because I was just
Yep.
like, this just gave me that, but in the desert. Yes.
It did. Yeah. In like a Texas environment. Like it is so satisfying in that it's like, it's a murder mystery. It's like a cop drama, you know? You know what you're getting. But like one of those done really, really well with a character who is complicated but like very relatable. It just is so, people love that. It's so satisfying. And it's satisfying in the same way that Mayor of Easttown is satisfying, where you're like, you know this woman, you know a mayor, you know like, you know a Leanne in your life. It just felt so real.
Not only, and like the twists at the end, like I don't want to say too much about it, but like they were kind of similar in the sense that it's the least person you like it's the person that you least expect. And I love it because it just kind of takes you through all of these different, like, Laura does such a good job at pointing the reader at, what do you call it, like faking out potential suspects. And she does that so well in this book, because I was just like, I don't know, like 3 chapters in, I'm like, oh, I know who did it. Or like, you know, later on, I'm like, oh, I know who did it. And it's like, no, you're wrong. Like, you're absolutely wrong. It wasn't that person. And I love that because it's like, you think you're so smart, but it wasn't that. That's not what happened. And I love that because it's done, just the twists and turns of the story are done so well that I didn't know where the story was going to end. And I love that. I was really, really surprised by the end of it.
But it also didn't feel like, because the other thing that I don't like is when you're like, oh, it's just someone random. And you're like,
yes.
Oh, okay, like I get that you like picked someone that I didn't expect because you wanted me to be surprised, but it's not satisfying because it doesn't really like gel with the rest of the story. And you're like, oh, okay, like it was like, oh, it was Leanne the whole time. She was investigating a murder she did, you know, something like that, where you're just like, that's not who it is, by the way, readers. I'm just making a joke to say, like, it's not like one of those things where you're just like, well, that was stupid. Like we didn't even like know this, you know, like it made sense within the story. And that is like, for me, a good mystery.
Yeah, it was just delicious, I would like to say.
Delicious.
And, you know, delicious, yeah. I think some of the themes, let's talk about it just to kind of get our readers to tell them why you need to go read this book. You're going to see a little bit of justice and corruption in this book. And I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but all of the obstacles that kind of get put in the way of Leanne trying to solve like the murders and like trying to connect the dots. Like she gets put against the wall a lot of times in trying to get money to source evidence, trying to like work with different departments and just trying to balance a lot of those like, I don't know, relationships. Like she has to finagle her own personal relationships within other organizations to get the case moving. And I found that to be quite fascinating. Like I love that she was such I don't want to say that she's a good person, but her intentions are always trying to solve like the actual mystery of the case. Like even though she's a complicated character, like her intentions are always set, and just her having to finagle like all of these different situations with the different police departments was kind of stressful to watch. Like she wanted to do the right thing, but people just kind of kept saying like, oh, there's no money, so here's a little paper and a notepad, go ahead and solve the case. And that's it. That's all she had at her disposal. Not really, she had more, but it's kind of that's how she made it. Laura try to kind of tell us in her storytelling.
Yeah. And I think what's difficult and what I loved about this too is that you talked about like the corruption element of it and the need to like work relationships within the system. I think what we watch Leanne struggle with is that she is so guided by like what should be right. She's like, no, I need this evidence, so I should be able to get it regardless of like how much it costs. Or like I shouldn't have to wait 2 years for a rape kit to be processed. Or I shouldn't have to beg for money to like investigate a tire track. And because of that, she's like not very good at manipulating relationships. Like in a way, she's not willing to play the game to get what she wants. And we see her like come up against a lot of obstacles because very much in her department, it's like an old boys club. You know, it's like an old timey Texas small town, very misogynistic. and she's not willing to play like the damsel and like, you know, rub up against their egos to get what she wants. And it causes delays in this case. And it's frustrating to read as a reader, but as a woman in like an environment that is male dominated, I was like, yep, this sucks. It's so annoying. And I felt her pain in that way.
And because of that, because of her being a woman in law enforcement, a lot of the roles that her like captain officer would put them in is like, oh, because you're a woman, go talk to this victim's parents, or go deal with this, or maybe act as a person that is going to be the face of the department in like an interview or something. Because they're kind of, this old boys club are trying to say like, because you're a woman, this is kind of like the role that you should be doing. So you can kind of still see like, yeah, like she's not an expert manipulator, and she's just like, I don't want to do this. Like she would say no, but ultimately she kind of gets pressure a lot by her management to have to be put up with those type of roles, which very relatable, by the way.
And it is hilarious because like something that I love about Leanne is like she's not a very soft person. So they keep putting her in these positions and you're like, but she's not even like well equipped to do this. I wouldn't say that she's like very nurturing. And it's like, I love that because I'm that way too, but you're just like, don't even let her do this. She's always like a little bit brash, a little bit like extra aggressive. I don't know. It just made me laugh because I'm like, she's not even like very good at fulfilling this traditionally female role in the best way.
She's like, well, this is the only woman we got. Go out there, lady. That's pretty much what he felt like. Mm-hmm. Another one of my favorite things here was just the way that I love that Laura does such a good job at defining how hard certain police departments potentially try to solve certain mysteries versus others. So you know, we already kind of know this internally. Like if you have a lot of money and influence in certain parts of town, potentially the police department is going to try a lot harder to solve that a lot quickly. So like the more pressure you have, and how potentially a lot of cold cases go cold because they don't really put any effort into trying to solve them, because those are people that potentially don't have a lot of influence, a lot of power, or people that may be forgotten by their community. So I really love that that gets highlighted in here. It's a really big theme of the book. And because this takes place in like Marfa, Texas, near like the Mexico-US border, there's a lot of discussion about potentially, oh, these are just like the people, if we found like cadavers or like bones or whatever, these are just like passers, they call them. So people that are crossing the border, so we don't really care about them. So I really love that she touches on that and the reality that many people are just forgotten versus some other ones that if there is a lot of influence and power, they are going to do everything that they can to try to solve these mysteries. So that was a really heavy theme, but one that I loved.
It's so interesting too, because you like think about, okay, I like compare this to like a medical, like I have a friend who is a doctor, and one of the things that he said is like, one of the best things about my job is that I never have to worry about what kind of person that I'm treating is, because it's my job as a doctor to do no harm. And so I'm like, my only ethical concern is, am I giving this person the best care? And I don't have to make value judgments on like whether they deserve it, which is like tough, but like also extremely important to do that job well. And here you see kind of the opposite of that, where like really this police department is beholden to how visible a case is going to be and how bad they'll look if they don't solve it really quickly. And they don't really even view some of these people crossing the border as, they like completely remove their humanity. They kind of like, especially the chief has this attitude of like, well, they had it coming. And you see that sort of like played against his sister-in-law, who is, what do they call it? A desert angel, who like leaves out water and is like assisting them, because she's like, at the end of the day, these are human beings. So like, it's my job to make sure that I'm doing whatever I can to render aid. And then this very opposite view of the chief, who's like, I don't really care, because it's not, like he doesn't even view them, it's like a problem to be solved, but not a person to be cared for. And it's just like, wow, that's a really crappy thing about the police department, that they're not like, it's like every case should be held in the same esteem, because that's literally the foundation of your job.
Exactly. Like he seemed that, like he made it sound like it was more of a nuisance than anything else. It's just like, oh, this is like an annoying little thing here.
Yeah.
But yeah. I love that that's like one of the main themes here, and it is highlighted throughout the book, and it was, yeah, it broke my heart, but I'm glad that Laura talks about it in her stories. Anything else you want to chat about before we go talk to Laura?
I just think like one of the things that I think that makes this book really so good and so satisfying is that there's such a good balance between character, plot, and setting in a way that like I think every one of those things hits. I care about each one of the characters. The setting being from like living in Texas and being in these areas and knowing these areas is so accurate and so satisfying. And then the plot just weaves in so beautifully. And I think that's why this works for me is like that it's the trifecta of story elements just work so well and like really feel authentic.
So well said, Lindsay. And I think with that, I think we need to close it out. I think with that, we have to go ahead and go talk to Laura.
Let's go
right
talk
now
to Laura.
because
Okay.
That was so good. That was so good. All right, welcome back, everybody. So now we have been joined by Laura Griffin. Welcome, Laura. Yay!
Hi, thanks
Welcome.
for having me. I'm so glad
Thanks
to
for
be
coming.
here.
We're so excited to chat with you. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of a bio, so which I know that you've already have heard, but we have to do it. And it's such a good one too. Laura Griffin is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of more than 30 books and novellas. Her books have been translated into 14 languages. Laura is a two-time Brita Award winner for Scorch and Whisper of a Warning, as well as the recipient of the Daphne du Maurier Award for Untraceable. Her book, Desperate Girls, was named one of the best books of 2018 by Publishers Weekly. Laura lives in Austin, Texas, where she is working on her next novel. Yay! Welcome back.
Welcome.
Thank
We're
you.
so
I'm
excited.
so glad to be with y'all.
We absolutely love this book. I know that we were chatting about this right before you joined us, about right before we like started recording, but this was just the perfect mystery thriller book that we need in our lives. Like we just like devoured the book in like a matter of like a couple of days because we just wanted to hear all about the mystery and like the who did it. Like because you took us in a lot of twists and turns in this book.
Yay.
It was one of those where I like read the first 98% in like a matter of one sitting. And then the last 20 pages, I was like, I'm going to slow down so embarrassingly slowly because I'm not ready to like figure out, I'm not ready to leave this world.
All the reveals happen.
Yes, exactly.
And everything gets tied up so nicely. Like, I love when that happens. That you're like, oh my gosh, that thing that happened in chapter blah, blah, blah is paying off here towards the end. I love that.
Thank you. Sometimes
But-
my editor has to help me with that because you have all these plot threads, you know, that you start planting early in the story. And then there's always usually a dangling one at the end that I forget to tie up. And my agent usually reads the book first and she'll be like, you forgot to tell us what happened with that. And so then I'll go back and if she misses it, then my editor will catch it. So there's a lot to tie up.
So how do you normally do that? Like, do you start, like, do you have like a, I don't know, like I imagine like this like red string board with all of your theories as you're planning out the story, or how does that process work?
Well, I'm really a visual person, so I use a lot of visuals to help me stay on track. And in this case, the setting is such a big part of the story and I had all these photographs from my trip out to West Texas. And so I was using all these pictures to create like this storyboard with the setting and what the characters look like. And just some of the places where scenes happen, from like the little dive bar to, you know, the desert, you know, out where one of the murders happens. So I have like a storyboard that's very visual with pictures and, you know, photographs I've taken or some things I've clipped from magazines, things like that. Then I have another storyboard that's note cards with all the different scenes. And sometimes I move them around because pacing is so important if you're writing a thriller, that you really have to keep the pace moving, but you have to keep conscious of what kind of the rhythms of the story. It's not all happening at breakneck speed. There's some moments where it's a little bit slower because you're getting more into the characters. And so I try to organize a storyboard that's, you know, where are big things going to happen, and then I can move them around as I need to.
One of the things we talked about before this was just being in Texas and having visited Marfa. The picture that you paint of that area is so authentic, and it felt really, it was exactly my experience having spent time in that area. So whatever your vision board looked like, it was some very clear photos, because it was one of the things that struck me most is that the setting is like, I hate when people say setting as a character, but like it really like it is that area of Texas has such a distinct kind of feeling about it and a distinct kind of community, and that just comes through so much in the way that you wrote these characters in this place.
Thank you. You know, it's such a different place, and I grew up in Texas, and most of my books are set in a place in Texas. Different, like I've got, you know, books set in the piney woods and books that are set in the hill country, and quite a few books that are set on the Texas Gulf Coast where it's more the, you know, the coastal, you know, backdrop. But this is such a different landscape. It's, you know, the people are different. The landscape is different. The elevation is different. It's just, you know, there's people that live their whole lives in Texas and never get out there and see it. And it's just such a different face of the state. So, but I love it out there. It's beautiful. It's vast. It's really kind of raw and rugged and kind of wild. I mean, it truly is. It's so uninhabited and empty in many places. So it's a place to visit if you haven't been there.
And I think like this setting too, like it just kind of added to that isolation feel for like our main character, Leanne, which I thought it was so good. I mean, like it just kind of works in so many levels because it just contributes to the ambience and like what Leanne, our main character, is going through as she's trying to solve the big mystery throughout the book. So it just kind of works in so many ways. I just love the isolation and like that feeling of it. It was just so well done.
It's kind of an interesting contrast because on one hand, it's such a vast desert setting, you know, this Big Bend area of Texas where, you know, you've got these wide open spaces. But on the other hand, she lives in this little town. She lives in this tiny, small town like Marfa, Texas, where it's so small that everybody knows everything about everyone and everyone's in each other's business. And you can't really have a personal life because everyone knows, you know, what everyone's up to. So she's kind of struggling between the feeling of isolation of being out in this remote area, but also the feeling of claustrophobia of having all her friends and neighbors that she's known her entire life, you know, be in her business. And that's a conflict that she has. So it's kind of both things happening at once.
Yeah, that absolutely comes through. And one of the things that Magda and I were kind of talking about in this is like, given the closeness of the relationships, you know, Leanne is one of those people who is very driven by like, this is right. And so I want to do it because this is the right thing to do. And so she struggles sometimes to sort of like navigate the system that a lot of her community is operating off of, which is like, you know, an old boys club kind of. And like not doing that very well because she to some extent like knows these people for a long time and just like can suffer no fools. Were you thinking about that when you were writing her and like making her just a contrast to the people around her in a lot of ways?
Yes, I mean, especially because she's a woman in law enforcement. And, you know, in the course of writing different series, I've, you know, been around a lot of law enforcement people and interviewed a lot of law enforcement people. And just, I'm always fascinated by the women. The one that pops into my head right now, I interviewed a woman who was part of the SWAT team in LAPD years ago. And I asked her, you know, what percent of this LA SWAT team is women? And at that point she said, well, my percent, me, that's it. And so she was just, I mean, it was fascinating to talk to this woman because she's such a pioneer. I mean, she, at that moment in time was the only woman on the team. And so it's just interesting to me to see how she navigates just this world of, and, you know, her father in the story was a cop. And so it's something that's in her family, but she's a woman. And so it makes her kind of the odd man out, even though she's kind of got this connection, this close connection to law enforcement through her father and his network. She still feels this sense of being a little bit the odd man out.
Was she I can imagine she's one of the inspirations for Leanne, right? Because Leanne also comes from this police family. She's one of the few women in the force.
Yes.
So I'm guessing she's like a big part of that inspiration, huh?
That's right. And also, when I interviewed this woman, it was interesting to me. She was very petite, and I just, you know, she was surrounded by these big, brawny guys that do all this weightlifting, and just, you know, it's just the contrast was interesting. And so I kind of set a little bit of that contrast up with Leanne. And one of her friends in the story is another cop. He works for the sheriff's office, and he's kind of also a physical contrast to her. He's kind of more big and bulky, and he does like the raids, and so it's just kind of setting up that contrast between her and the people around her.
And one of the things that I love that is, we were talking about this earlier, is that Leanne, because she's a woman in law enforcement, she gets put in these weird positions by her like chief and commander of like, well, I guess you should be going and talking to this family and delivering the news, because it's going to be better if a woman delivers that. Even though she's not the most nurturing person, but because she's a woman, she gets put into this
the
odd
touchy-feely
positions.
assignments.
That was intentional, right? Like, you're like, okay,
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and I've talked to female police officers, and they say, well, and I'll get stuck kind of looking after the children at the crime scene that are, kind of running out. Just being kind of pigeonholed into certain roles because of your gender, just being kind of maybe also underestimated. And I think that's something that she struggles with in the story is just people underestimating her. But she finds a way to use that to her advantage because they don't really see her coming. They don't realize that she's not exactly doing what they're expecting her to do, and that she's going to have a different reaction, and that she's kind of doing a lot of things behind the scenes that they don't realize. And because she's underestimated. So that's part of the story arc for her.
That definitely comes through as you're reading it. Like, now that you're saying this, I think it's interesting because we were talking about community, but you do get this feeling of isolation because so much of what's happening in the book is Leanne working around that community construct on her own to get things done. And so like so much is happening without anyone noticing. And it's sort of incredible what she's able to accomplish before anyone even has a sense of like where she is or what she's working on or who she's talking to. When you're creating the initial concept of this book, I know you mentioned that you did some research with SWAT teams and things like that. Like where do you like to start as a writer? Like, did Leanne come to you first? Did the concept of the murder come to you first? Does the research kind of sort of start to shape how the story goes? Like, what's your entree into a story that has so many layers like this?
It depends. It varies from book to book. Sometimes I start with a specific person. In this case, the kernel of the story idea came from the setting, because a lot of the conflicts in the story are just basically a product of the setting. The setting is in a crossroads right now. It's the kind of the gateway to these national parks, and they're getting all this tourism. And so they've got these influx of urbanites where, and this has been happening a lot since the pandemic, all these people fled the cities. They want to get away. They want to get away from, the grind, and they want to get away from their laptops, and they want to go out into nature and, get away from it all. But they bring all that technology with them. They bring their technology, they bring their city expectations. And so right now her community is at a kind of a crossroads where they want the economic boost and they want the tourism and they need that, but they don't like all the influx of modern just expectations that are kind of changing the core of their community, and also raising the prices for them, and driving people out of the homes that used to be affordable. And so the place is kind of one of the main sources of conflict. The conflicts are kind of built into this setting, and she's kind of coming into this, and she did her training as a police officer in Dallas, so she kind of sees both sides. She sees the big city, the goods and bad things about a big city, but then she also sees her small town being kind of transformed by these influences. And so she's kind of at the heart of that conflict, I guess you could say.
Well, and not only that, like the transformation is happening so quickly that I want to call this the infrastructure hasn't kept up. Like the police force is still really small while a lot of the crime is picking up, or like disturbances and everything. And Leanne gets caught in the middle of like, their chief and the other departments trying to balance these big changes.
Yes.
Which I think wherever you go in anytime, like even here in Austin, we're always like, oh, remember when Austin back in 2005 and it used to be so tiny, like you can kind of actively see this town going through that.
It's happening in our town as well. I mean, it's just, it's a transformation, and technology has a role in it too. I mean, one of the threads in the story is the story of this man who was he was convicted of the most notorious crime in the history of the town, this murder of a young woman, a teenager, and he's exonerated because new evidence comes to light. But these types of exonerations are kind of happening all over the place because DNA technology is advancing, and so all these cold cases that people thought were solved or were going to remain forever unsolved are now being reopened and looked at again, and we're learning a lot that we didn't know. We're learning about a lot of mistakes that were made because the DNA evidence doesn't lie, and so it's interesting how technology kind of plays a role in just the town is trying to keep up with all these modern developments, and there's kind of a lot of friction there.
It's that push-pull, actually, now that you're mentioning it too, like there's a push and pull between like, is community a good thing and where does it tip into being a bad thing? Because so much about this case is revolving around this community bias and this very distinct, difference between people who exist at the sort of top economic strata of the community and the people at the bottom, and how little like reality and technology and investigation play a role when you have years of bias happening. And so I just think it's so fascinating the way in which you said like it starts with setting, but like setting really does, that would not happen in I mean, maybe it would happen in a Dallas, but like not to the extent that it does in this story. And it's just interesting to see the way that plays out.
Yeah. And when you have a small town, it can be a microcosm for some of these different things that kind of all converge together. And that's kind of what happens here.
And like, I think one of the great things about this change is that it does start putting a little bit more pressure into this police department into also solving potential cases that they were dismissing. Because one of my favorite plot points in this book is when you start talking, well, I guess here in the story, you're talking about like all of these missing women or new bones and evidence that just gets thrown to the side because they're just like, oh, we don't really care about this because these are probably just passers, just illegal immigrants crossing. So we don't really care about that. Versus contrasting it with somebody like who was or one of the main victims earlier on that for the Sean Moriarty case, where it was people of influence that were pushing for these convictions. So now this change into this community is kind of pushing forward that we do need to care about these things that you didn't think were necessary.
Yeah, and you can really dust off some of these old cold cases and really find some answers now. And there's really no excuse not to. I mean, it's the technology is available, and so if you have all this overlooked evidence, you can go back and look at it again. And that it really is happening across the country. I mean, almost every day I read an article about some new case that was solved of some long ago murder I read one the other day, just some 9-year-old child, and the murderer had been dead for years, but they didn't solve the case at the time, and the family never had answers, and now they've been able to find out what happened. And so I think that was part of one of the themes I wanted to kind of look at, was just these kind of uncovering these truths that have been buried. In Leanne's case in the story, there's things in her family that have been buried for years, and kind of bringing it up to the surface and having to deal with it because you can't get around it. The truth is kind of staring you in the face, and it can no longer be buried. And so I really wanted to kind of look at that and watch her kind of go through that as part of her, grappling with the issues in her family that have been unresolved for so many years.
Was there a particular like story that you saw that like it just kind of made you like it inspired you to like put this plot line into the book? Like was something like, this is something that I kind of want to delve into? Like was there like a story that you saw?
Well, like I said, I was really inspired by the setting. I've been wanting to put a story in that part of Texas for a long time, and just thinking about how the setting was going to play a role in the story. And it's such a beautiful, rich setting that I loved that. But in terms of the suspense plot, there's a lot of things that went into it. But one of the stories I read before I started writing this was about a man in Texas who was convicted of killing his wife and spent more than 20 years in prison. And then DNA evidence came to light that exonerated him and implicated somebody else, and then he was released from prison. But it was such an interesting case to read about because, what are the ramifications of that? Someone was lost 2 decades of their life or more because they were convicted of something they didn't do. And how does that make the family feel? All these years they've thought they had closure on something or thought that justice had happened on behalf of their loved one. And then they come to find out that wasn't right, that they were misled by people, that all these things that they had thought were true were not true. And then how does this man kind of get out of prison after all this time and put his life back together? And all the hatred that's been targeted his way for all these years. I mean, is he bitter? Is he relieved? I mean, what are his emotions? And so it was really, really interesting to me to read about that case. And I tried to kind of weave into the story. It's not just a case. I mean, this person that gets exonerated in the story comes back to the town and kind of wants to confront some of the people that wronged him. And Leanne gets kind of caught in the middle of that because her father, who was in law enforcement, was one of the people that was involved in his case. And so she's having to kind of grapple with these mistakes of her father. And I wanted to see that happen because in the story, Leanne has such a fraught relationship with her mother and her father is dead. And so she's just really struggling with how to deal with it all.
Can I ask you, because I also find this element of the story to be something that I thought about a lot, like how, to your point, like how do you grapple with resuming your life that's been put on pause or like put in this like completely different trajectory for circumstances beyond your control? And like Sean is an example of like, does he become the monster that people think he is because he spent so much time in jail? Like in your mind, do you have a thought about what happened, like who Sean becomes or like what he does after this book? Because I think about Sean a lot and like how he goes on and what he does after this story kind of wraps up.
Yeah, I think what one of the core things about him is he's the survivor. He's a survivor. He survived all those years in prison. He survived, just mentally the being wrongfully accused and wrongfully convicted. So I think he's a survivor, and I think ultimately he's going to reinvent his life, and he's going to, get out and find a new path. I don't think he's going to stay in the town of Madrone. I think he's going to move on from there because he had a purpose when he went back, but once he achieves that purpose, I think he's going to move on and reinvent his life and make something out of the time he has left. Because if there's one thing he appreciates now after what happened to him is time, having time back, having his life back. So I don't think he's going to spend his remaining time in that town.
My heart is full. All of you need to go read this book because you'll realize how Sean is just one of those characters that you break for a little bit. He's such a good like foil to Leanne in a lot of ways. And I just love their dynamic together.
Yeah, like, another one of the themes that like kind of goes so well with Sean is that idea of perception, like everything that we as readers are being told in the beginning or the first half of the book, you're assuming multiple things. Like with Sean, he came across like really scary, being a little like following people around and everything. But ultimately, like he was just kind of seeking redemption. Same thing with like Leanne's family, right? Like the story with her mom and her brother, her dad. And like it is this smoking mirrors type of situation that you're creating where all of these layers of what we think we know, it's not really there. And I'll be curious to know, how do you plan for this layering of the characters? Like that, do you have like an outline? Are you just like a pantser? Or how do you build out this type of like characterization for your characters?
One of I don't remember where I read this, but it was in a writing workshop some years ago. And the author was talking about in suspense, you always want your main characters to have a secret. And so I try to think about that when I'm designing a story. What is their secret? What is the thing beneath the surface that people don't know? And sometimes it's actually a specific, very weighty secret that has to do with the suspense plot. You know, they know some key information, but sometimes it's part of their personality or it's their hidden agenda. But everybody needs to have a secret. And so if you kind of start from that point and then you're building out the characters, then the question is, when are you going to reveal these secrets? You know, you don't reveal them all at the same time. You kind of layer them into the story. And I think as the reader starts to understand that everything is not what it seems, then they want to know more and they want to kind of peel that back and start to understand what's really going on. They sense that there's something going on beneath the surface, but they're not quite sure what it is. And so they keep reading because they want to know what those secrets are. They want those reveals. And so
we are proof of that.
Yeah,
that's why we said that we read this book so quickly.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Laura, what do you, just along those same lines too, because without revealing the end of this story, I think that is one of the hard parts about a good mystery is like, how do you keep it a mystery to the latest possible point without making the twist just random for the reader? What do you think makes a satisfying twist or reveal for readers when developing a story like this? And what are you looking for to say like, okay, this is our person?
Well, as a reader, what I am always looking for, I love it when I'm surprised by a twist at the end of a story. I love it when I didn't see it coming. But at the same time, what you need to make it satisfying is that if you reflect back on the book, you say, oh, there was a clue. There were those clues. There was that foreshadowing. So even if you don't figure it out ahead of time, once you do know the answer, whether it's the whodunit or the motive or the secret agenda from one of the characters, you look back on the story and you think, oh, all those clues were right there. I didn't see it. But so that's to me, when an author can do that, when a thriller writer can kind of place those little clues throughout the story, and then at the end, when the reveals happen, you say, oh my gosh, it was there. It was there all along. I think it's kind of a ripoff when you get to the end and there's a big reveal and there was just no clue. I mean, how could you have ever, there were no puzzle pieces to put together. It was just suddenly the puzzle pieces come raining down from the sky and, you know, that's no fun.
Do you pick your person first and then work your way back into the clues? Or do you, as you're developing characters, think like, oh, this person's secret makes sense as the primary secret in the story?
A lot of times I know what the twist is going to be at the end and how it's all going to come out. But there have been a couple times where I've gotten to the end and I thought, you know what, this is too obvious. I'm going to make it the killer is going to be a different person. And then you have to go back and plant some more clues. But, you know, every now and then I'll throw a wrench in my own plan if I think something is too obvious and it's not going to be suspenseful enough.
When I was reading about you, like before, you know, we were doing our research before we had you on. You used to be an investigative reporter, and I'm guessing this is kind of what developed your love for writing this type of mystery novels. And not only that, but you've also got to do a lot of really cool training with like the police and like doing like fast car training and like shooting guns. Like, what has been your favorite experience? And did you have to do anything special for the process of writing this book?
Well, so yeah, I got my start as a newspaper reporter, and my beat at the time when I was working in the Chicago area. I was covering education, but as a young person on the staff, I was a new person on the staff. I had to also cover weekends and holidays. You know, you get the worst shifts when you're the new guy. So when that would happen, I would get to cover the hard news, just anything and everything that would happen: fire, theft, kidnapping. Whatever happened, if it was my weekend or if it was my holiday, then I had to cover it. I had to go cover it. But I really, really enjoyed the hard news stories. Those were the ones where I would get to interview the police officers, the investigators. Maybe sometimes I would get to interview a victim of a crime. And I thought those were really the most compelling. And so then when I sat down and started writing fiction, I was really drawn to the crime fiction, crime stories that had that kind of seed of a story, was the crime that happened or the suspense. And so one of the things that's kind of left over from my reporter days, though, is I love to interview people. I love to just go out and talk to people about, what they do or what happened, and just really listen to what they say. And so I think that's something that I still try to carry with me into each different book is, talking to people, talking to them about their jobs, talking to them about their lives, where they live, going to the place. There's just no substitute. I mean, I know there's so much you can do online now, but there's really no substitute for being in a place. If I get a chance to interview someone in their workplace, I always jump on that because you'll just get so much information by just looking at where they work, and seeing the kind of people and what kind of, little stuff do they have on their desk, or what are they, just the whole ambiance of the place. You start to get the feel for the culture of it, which I think is so fun. And in this case, I spent a lot of time out in West Texas, just, trying to soak it up, not just the, tromping around Big Bend National Park and hiking and seeing the nature, but the little old out of the way burrito shop, or the little coffee place, or you go into a restaurant and there's like a bulletin board with little community, little business cards or flyers. People are having a concert, or they need a babysitter, or they're offering services, just what is the type of community, what is going on in that community. In this case, I subscribed to the local newspaper, and I started getting just, news tidbits, what makes the news in a town of, 1,000 people. And you start to get a flavor for a place. So it's, just kind of soaking up those details, because when you can include those details, it kind of brings a place to life. So
yes, that comes through so clearly. And in fact, it made me laugh a couple of times because I was in Big Bend last year, and some of the places that you described, I was like, I think I bought that $8 burrito that used to be $3. Like, it's just those little details of knowing, like, oh, I think I am the gentrification that this town is pushing back on, really made me laugh. It felt so authentic. And I think it's so funny that it is such a journalist mindset to be like, what do they have on their desk? What things go up on the community board? Like, it's those things that I think, you subconsciously absorb, but maybe as a writer, like, you're more attuned to, and that really make the story feel like, oh no, I think I'm this person they're talking about, or I know this person.
I
And
was
I think
definitely that person. I was the person. I was taking pictures of everything. I mean, I was taking pictures everywhere I went, and yeah. But it's good. It's for a good cause, right?
yeah, exactly. Typically we start our interviews with this, but we're going to end because we got so excited. We jumped right into the book. And it's one of our favorite things to ask people. What would you say is the book that made you a reader, or that spurred you into wanting to be a writer?
Ooh, that's a good one. I at a young age, I started reading Stephen King, which is probably a terrible idea, for little kids. I remember when I was at summer camp, I read Pet Sematary, and my cabin backed up to these woods, and I was staying up late with my flashlight reading this book about, the pet cemetery off in the woods. And I just remember being so terrified and scared. And somehow that became, I like to read suspense for my entire life. So I read all the Nancy Drew books, and then segued into, grown-up mysteries. So I think just always wanting to read mysteries. I've always wanted to read suspense and mysteries. And I don't know. I think Stephen King is amazing. He's written a novel, or not a novel. He's written a book about writing called On Writing. And if any aspiring authors out there, I highly recommend it. His story is so interesting, and how he became a writer and all the grit that he has. And I've gone back to that book again and again because it's just such a wonderful inspiration. So that book was very formative for me. So.
And the amount of stories that he's able to output, it's crazy how much he's
He's
able
so
to
prolific.
write.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I will say I just recently read my very first Stephen King book, which I am ashamed. I know I'm really late
Oh,
to the game, but I get it. He's so good. Now I just
oh
want to go
yes,
read everything that he has done.
and he's got such a breadth of work out there. I mean, if horror isn't your thing, he's also got some other types of stories. I mean, he's has a lot of stories that are just quieter stories, and he's just so prolific. But he's really impressive.
Yeah, agreed.
A lifelong fan here.
Yeah, like like that's kind of how I started because I don't like to be scared, but I started with some of his like suspense kind of stories, and oh my gosh, yeah, they're so good. I can't wait to keep reading. Well, Laura, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you and what else you have going on?
Oh yes. Well, I love your podcast, and I'm so glad you guys are shining a light on new authors, new books, new bookstores, and thanks for what you do. I'm the book comes out next week, so it should be in stores. The audio version is great. I'm so excited about the narrator for the audio version. So if you like audiobooks, you'll be able to find it, and it comes out next week. And if you want any more details, I'm at lauragriffin.com.
Thank you again, Laura. And I think when this episode releases, it will have been released yesterday. So you'll
Oh,
be,
excellent.
yes.
Okay. We'll
So
go
go
find.
out and get it. You'll have roughly 2 days before you finish it, if I am any indication, but you'll devour it. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Literally Books, the podcast.
Where we say what we read.
And we mean what we say. Bye.